The galaxy had not known peace for a lifetime. 70 years of endless fighting had turned the stars into graveyards, and still the war dragged on without mercy. It began at the edge of known space when the Cathari swarms first appeared. Dark shapes sliding out of the void like a storm no one had seen coming. They were creatures of hunger. Vast insectoid fleets with carapace hulls that gleamed like obsidian, wings of metal that spread wider than cities, and minds linked in a single terrible chorus. They did not speak in words, only in violence. They consumed planets, broke armies, and smothered every attempt to resist. The first worlds to fall screamed into the void for help, but their voices were drowned in the crack of shattered moons and burning skies. Those who survived told stories of the Cathari's cruelty, how they tore cities apart with claws of steel, how their ships descended like locusts until not even soil was left untouched. Every victory the Council of Nine Races claimed came at a price greater than loss itself. Armies were rebuilt, ships reforged, alliances bound tighter, yet still the swarm came wave after wave, endless as the sea. The Ulati, noble and ancient, sent their living starships, vessels born from the roots of their great world tree, grown over centuries and filled with the light of suns. They glided into the battles with elegance, their weapons singing as beams of energy cut swathes through the swarm. But for every Cathari ship destroyed, 10 more emerged. The Trinari unleashed gravity cannons capable of folding ships into themselves, yet the swarm adapted, weaving and shifting, finding paths through the broken space. The Jalari bent light into blades, searing swarms in radiant arcs, but their brilliance was swallowed in the dark tide. Even the Zor, with their armored behemoth cruisers bristling with firepower, could not hold back the hunger. The swarm devoured without fear, without hesitation, without pause. Years turned into decades. Heroes rose and fell. Worlds that had once been filled with laughter now lay silent, their skies choked with ash. The Council tried everything. They built fortresses in the stars. They set traps in the black between systems. They devised strategies with logic and precision, placing fleets like pieces on a board. Yet nothing worked. For every world defended, 3 more burned. Hope became a fragile thing, carried only in whispers. To most, the war was already lost, though their bodies had not yet fallen. In the great halls of the Council, despair lingered in every shadow. The 9 races gathered, proud heads bowed under the weight of failure, their voices hushed as they debated what little remained of their strength. And still, through all their sorrow, there was one name they never spoke aloud, though it lived in the silence between them. The humans, a young species, still wild, still unproven, dangerous, reckless, and untamed. The Council had kept them away from the stars, wary of their violence, wary of their ambition. They had watched them from afar, watched their wars, their inventions, their stubborn refusal to bow to anything greater than themselves. The humans were not like the others. They did not rise to elegance or wisdom. They rose to struggle, to defiance, to fight. And so the question was whispered only in the darkest corners, never in open council. If the galaxy was truly lost, if no other hope remained, what would happen if the humans were unleashed? No one dared say the words aloud, but every mind carried the same thought. Humanity was the storm they had feared to summon. Now, with the Cathari tide crashing against the last walls of civilization, fear itself might not matter. The envoy's ship descended through the gray skies of Earth, a sleek vessel of silver and light, nothing like the steel giants that waited in orbit above. Her name was Seralith, a voice of the Council, and her mission carried the weight of desperation. She had spoken to kings, generals, and commanders of races far older than hers, yet never had she felt such unease as when she walked into the chamber of humans. They did not build halls of glass or crystal like the Jalari, nor towering spires that touched the heavens like the Ulathi. Their meeting place was carved from stone and steel, plain, hard, and alive with the sound of machines. Screens glowed with maps of stars. Walls hummed with the pulse of engines. The air smelled of oil and iron, a reminder that here was a people who bent the universe not with elegance but with force. At the head of the chamber stood Captain Elias Rourke, scarred and stern, his uniform blackened from old battles, eyes sharp as though they had already seen the end of the war. Around him stood men and women of every nation, hands calloused, faces worn, each bearing the look of those who had lived with struggle as naturally as breathing. Seralith bowed, her words careful, her tone heavy with truth. "We come to ask for help, though we should not. The war has gone on too long. Entire peoples have been destroyed. We cannot hold the Cathari back. We cannot survive another season of battle. We ask you, though we know what we are asking may doom you as it has doomed us." She paused, her long silver eyes searching their faces for some glimmer of hope, yet finding only quiet, steady stares. "If you fight them, you will die. No race has stood against the swarm and lived. Not truly." For a moment there was silence, broken only by the hum of machines. Then Rourke stepped forward, his boots striking the metal floor with slow, deliberate weight. His voice was low, a growl shaped into words. "You've been fighting for 70 years. We've been watching, studying, waiting. You tell us no race has stood against them, but maybe that's because no race has fought like us. You think we'll die? Maybe. But if we die, we'll take them with us. And if we don't die," his lips curled into a thin smile, a smile that sent a shiver even through Saralith's ancient bones, "then this war ends." The council envoy tried to argue, to speak of the swarm's numbers, of their endless hives, of the futility of throwing small fleets into oceans of death. But every word faltered in her mouth as she looked into the eyes of the humans. She saw no hesitation, no fear. There was a fire there, fierce and untamed, something she had never seen in the long centuries of council service. These were not beings who measured battles in decades or victories in honorable terms. These were beings who had carved their own history with blood and iron, who had risen from fire and ruin time and again, who had always fought not because they believed they would win, but because surrender was something their hearts did not understand. Rourke leaned closer, his voice a whisper meant only for her, though the whole room seemed to feel it. "You came here because deep down you already know. You've tried everything else. Now it's our turn." And so the choice was made, not by votes or by councils, but by a single spark of will. Humanity would rise not as allies bound by treaties, but as warriors bound by defiance. They would step into a war that had broken galaxies. They would face an enemy that had crushed empires. And though Saralith's heart trembled with both fear and wonder, one truth echoed in her mind as the humans prepared their ships. The galaxy had called for salvation, and what it had summoned instead was fire. The Vega system was a place of dying light, its central star burning weak and red, its planets long since stripped by war. It had become a graveyard of fleets, a battleground where the Cathari swarm gathered in strength. Their ships came first as shadows on the horizon of space, then as a tide that swallowed the system whole, 30,000 vessels stretching in every direction until the stars themselves were drowned. They moved with perfect rhythm, wings of steel glinting, carapace hulls reflecting the weak sun like a mirror of death. The council fleet was already there, lined in formation. Thousands of ships spread in desperate lines, their engines glowing like fireflies against the darkness. Their commanders sent orders through tight channels, voices tense, hands shaking as they prepared for yet another hopeless stand. Even the bravest among them felt the weight of despair. They had seen this before. They had lost this before, and now it was happening again, only larger, only worse. Whispers moved through the ranks, carried by broken voices. This would be the last stand of Vega, perhaps the last stand of them all. Then a new signal cut through the comms, sharp and unexpected. Engines flared on the far edge of the system, and 9 ships appeared. Only 9. Small compared to the leviathans of the Council, plain compared to the living vessels of the Ulathi, or the curved blades of the Jalari. These ships bore scars on their hulls, their designs rough and sharp-edged, their guns too large for their frames, their armor layered thick like the hide of beasts. Human ships. The Valkyrie led them, its engines roaring brighter than the dying sun, its hull painted black with streaks of silver, a predator among prey. At once the council channels lit with disbelief, voices crying out warnings. "Fall back. You'll be torn apart," shouted a Jalari commander, his words thick with panic. "You cannot fight them alone," begged a Ulathi captain, her living ship trembling as if alive with dread. But the human fleet did not answer with caution. Instead, the Valkyrie surged ahead, engines howling, its 9 ships cutting straight into the heart of the swarm like spears thrown by giants. The Cathari reacted with mocking certainty, their comms filled with clicks and hisses of alien laughter. 9 ships against 30,000 was madness, and madness meant nothing to a swarm that knew only victory. They opened fire in waves, torrents of plasma and shards of burning metal filling the void. a storm that could tear apart moons. For a moment, the stars themselves seemed to vanish under the weight of destruction, but when the fire cleared, the humans were still there, shields burning white, hulls trembling but unbroken. They did not scatter, did not retreat, did not hesitate. They pressed forward faster. Their formation tightened, turning into a blade of light cutting deeper into the swarm. The council fleet froze in disbelief, their eyes wide, their voices silent. Never had they seen such reckless courage, never such raw defiance. Every race in the council had learned to fight with care, to preserve what little strength remained. But the humans fought as if the thought of holding back did not exist. Their ships dove through explosions, slipped between burning wreckage, fired guns so loud the void itself seemed to shake. For the first time in decades, the Cathari were forced to shift, their perfect rhythm broken, their endless tide unsettled. In the silence of the council channels, someone whispered what all of them were thinking, though none dared believe it. Madness, and the voice said, and yet in the very next breath another voice answered, steady and sure. No, not madness, humanity. The first human attack shattered the silence of disbelief, and the galaxy saw for the first time how differently this strange young race waged war, where the council had always fought with grace, careful precision, and rules carried from ancient traditions. The humans answered with fury and chaos, their weapons crude, yet terrifying in their power. The Valkyrie opened fire with rail cannons that spat solid metal slugs the size of towers, each one moving so fast it tore holes through space itself, ripping through Cathari hulls like paper and sending shockwaves that buckled the ships behind them. Nuclear warheads followed, not the neat beams of energy the council races preferred, but spears of destruction that bloomed into suns brighter than Vega's dying star, consuming entire clusters of swarm ships in fire that rolled across the void. The swarm reeled, screeching through their comms, their formations twisting and breaking as they scrambled to recover. Lieutenant Aya Chen's voice cut sharp through the storm, her words crisp, her hands moving faster than thought as she locked coordinates across the chaos. "Target their wings," she commanded, her eyes fixed on the shifting swarm. "Force them into each other." And like hunters trained to the same rhythm, the human ships obeyed, their rail cannons tearing at the delicate joints of Cathari cruisers, blowing apart the thin appendages that kept them steady in formation. One by one, the swarm ships spun out of control, smashing into their allies, colliding in sparks of metal and fire, their perfect rhythm collapsing into disorder. The council ships watching from a distance gasped in disbelief, unable to look away. To them, battle had always been a matter of control, elegance, careful maneuvers drawn with the patience of scholars. But humans fought like cornered beasts, vicious and clever, turning the swarm's strength into weakness, twisting chaos into a weapon. The Cathari tried to adapt, their hive mind shifting, their vessels pulling back to reform a new pattern, but the humans would not allow it. Captain Rourke pushed the Valkyrie forward with brutal speed, diving straight through clouds of debris, the hull screaming with heat and pressure, shields blazing white as enemy fire rained upon them. His voice, calm and steady despite the madness, rang across the comms. "Stay close. Stay loud, keep them afraid." And they did, flooding Cathari channels with noise, hacking into their signals with pulses of static and stolen voices, filling the swarm with panic, false orders, and broken rhythm until their once flawless communication became a storm of confusion. Explosions painted the dark, each brighter than the last, and still the humans pressed deeper, their fleet of 9 carving a path through 30,000 like wolves tearing into a herd. Every council commander watching, every soldier who had long since given up hope, felt something they had not felt in decades. Awe. The Jalari, masters of light, whispered in wonder at the raw violence of nuclear fire. The Ulathi, who had built ships that lived and breathed, watched in silence as crude human steel tore apart the swarm their elegant weapons had failed to stop. And though none of them said it aloud, each of them felt the same truth settling heavy in their hearts. Humans were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to win, and in the fire, the Council saw something far more dangerous than weapons or numbers. They saw belief. 2 hours into the battle, the stars themselves seemed to shiver as the Cathari flagship arrived. A monster of iron and claw that blotted out half the system with its shadow. A ship so vast it dwarfed moons, its armored plates glistening black like the shell of some ancient beast risen from the abyss. It was the heart of the swarm, the fortress that had led the destruction of empires, the weapon that no race had ever faced and survived, and at its arrival the scattered Cathari vessels screamed in unison, rallying to their master, their broken formation snapping back into order as the hive mind surged with renewed strength. Across the council channels, despair rippled like a wave. Voices cracked with panic. Commanders shouted to retreat, to regroup, to fall back before the monster. For all of them had seen this ship before and lived only because others had died in their place. But Rourke did not flinch, his eyes locked on the dark colossus, his voice steady as stone when he gave the order no other being would dare speak. Forward. The Valkyrie dove first, engines blazing brighter than fire, her hull groaning under the force as she hurled herself into the storm. The other 8 ships followed without hesitation, battered, scarred but unbroken, and together they cut through enemy fire that came like rain from the heavens, 1,000 blazing lances crashing against their shields, tearing at their steel. One ship fell, torn apart in a blossom of fire, but the rest pressed on, carving a path toward the beast. When they reached its armor, the human fleet did what no council race had ever dared. They did not circle or fire from afar. They latched onto it. Grappling arms bit into its shell, magnetic clamps locked onto its hide, and under the cover of burning guns, human marines hurled themselves into the maw of the Cathari flagship. Inside was a nightmare of living corridors, walls pulsing with alien light, the air thick with the stench of oil and blood. Cathari warriors, tall as giants with claws like blades, surged from the darkness, their screeches rattling the bones of even the bravest. The fight was brutal, close, and raw. Where the council soldiers had always relied on energy blades or elegant rifles, the humans fought with everything. They fired bullets that tore through chitin, swung knives that ripped into flesh, smashed armored heads against steel walls, and when they lost weapons, they used their fists. The corridors became rivers of fire and blood, screams of alien and human mixing into one terrible song. Lieutenant Ayachen led the charge through a narrow passage, her rifle barking flame as she cut a path toward the core, shouting orders through the smoke. Men and women followed without pause. Even when one fell, another took their place, the advance never stopping, never slowing. At the heart of the flagship, deep in its writhing guts of flesh and machine, Captain Rourke himself carried the weapon they had sworn never to use. A warhead forbidden by the Council, a weapon that could shatter a world. He planted it against the pulsing heart of the Cathari hive, the place where the mind of the swarm beat strongest, his hand resting on the trigger as the battle raged around him. For a moment he stood still, his chest heaving, the sounds of screams and fire echoing through the alien chamber, and he spoke not to his crew, not to the Council, but to himself. A low whisper of iron will. This ends now. And without another word, he pressed the trigger. The explosion was not like any other, not a mere burst of fire or light, but the tearing of a god's breath unleashed into the void, a sun born in the heart of the Cathari flagship that ripped its monstrous body apart from within, splitting armored plates like dry bark, shattering wings the size of continents, and sending a shock wave that rolled through the Vega system with the force of a dying star. The swarm cried out in unison, a shriek of rage and agony as their hive mind snapped, their unity broken, their perfect rhythm shattered into chaos, and for the first time in 70 years, the Cathari fled. Ships once driven by hunger now scattered like frightened birds, crashing into each other, breaking against asteroids, or fleeing blindly into the cold dark beyond the system. The Council fleets watched in silence, their commanders speechless, their soldiers frozen at their stations, unable to understand what their eyes told them. For entire generations had lived and died believing the swarm could never be stopped. And yet here it was, torn apart in less than half a day. When the blinding light of the explosion finally faded, when the burning wreckage of the flagship drifted in slow silence, a single voice rose on the comms, hoarse but unbroken. The voice of Captain Elias Rourke aboard the battered, scorched frame of the Valkyrie. "War's over," he said, each word carrying the weight of history. Steady and unshaken even as sparks leapt across his ruined bridge, even as smoke curled around his crew. "You're welcome." And in that moment the galaxy seemed to breathe again, though none dared to speak, none dared to move, for they all knew they were witnessing something far greater than victory. They had seen many heroes fall, many races burn, many fleets crumble, but they had never seen anything like this. 9 ships against 30,000, A war fought for 70 years ended in 5 hours by a people once dismissed as too violent, too reckless, too unrefined to join the council. Now the truth was written in fire across the stars. Humanity was not merely another race among many, not another voice in the chorus of civilizations. They were something different, something the galaxy had never known before. Survivors who turned war into instinct, builders who turned destruction into weapons, dreamers who refused to bow even when the universe itself demanded surrender. And though fear and awe twisted together in the hearts of the council races, though many wondered if unleashing humans had merely traded one danger for another, none could deny the truth that stood before them. The Cathari swarm was broken, and it was humans who had broken it. As wreckage drifted across the Vega sky and fire still burned against the black, the 9 races bowed their heads, some in gratitude, some in fear, some in quiet reverence, while the humans did not bow at all. Their ships hung battered and cracked but still alive, engines humming like tired hearts, weapons cooling but never silent, ready to fight again if the stars demanded it. And in the silence after the storm, in the stillness after the greatest battle the galaxy had ever seen, one thought carried across every mind, spoken or unspoken, clear as the light of that final sunburst. The day humanity joined the war was the day the war ended, and nothing in all the endless stars would ever be the same again.